Hello, everyone. I'm Tara Waters. I'm a partner at Ashurst, and I'm CEO of a part of our firm called Ashurst Digital Ventures. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about what that means now. Firstly, although I guess law and tech are probably the first two things that spring to mind whenever someone asks about me, I do like to think there's a little bit more to me than just what I happen to do to earn my paycheck. And I'm going to come back to this slide again towards the end of my 20-minute talk. But I think it's really important that people think a little bit more beyond just the day job. But so to sort of dive into my story and my journey, here it all is on one slide. So a longer than I'd like to admit, time ago, in a relatively far away place. I was a young girl growing up in a suburb of Albany, which happens to be the capital of New York State. I was sort of a classic bookwormy type of person, good at math and science, but also liked art and English and writing. And through a very strange twist of fate, for reasons that I don't understand, my father had read about in the early 90s something that was called the World Wide Web. And so in 1992, he actually had a student from a local engineering university come to our house and install a dial-up line for our computer. And this was pre-graphic browsers. This was text-only internet where you had to type in command lines in order to actually get information. It was pre-Netscape, and I have no idea how this happened, but somehow the Waters family ended up being probably one of the first families that was online in their home. And so really just computers just became a thing that was really kind of normal for me to have in my life on a day-to-day basis. And it was just something that, was something for me that was relatively easy to use and understand how to use. So I actually went on to graduate from that engineering university that was near my home, from whence the internet actually was brought to me back when I was just about starting high school. But I graduated not with a degree in engineering, but with a degree in electronic art, which basically meant I did art projects using computers. And this was really I guess, what was it, the mid to late 90s. And this is right when programs like Photoshop and video editing software were suddenly available to the mass consumer market. So the program that I graduated with was a brand new program. I think it was one of the first programs of its type actually in the United States. And in university, I had taught myself how to code, which was actually really, really common back in those days. Everyone was finally able to have their own personal website. So everyone kind of basically looked at what everyone else was doing and taught themselves how to do it too. And I managed to secure a job when I graduated at a .com consultancy. That was called Science. It sadly doesn't exist anymore. And these consultancies were basically the companies that were behind all of the really famous .coms that were being put out in the late 90s and early 2000s. So those are .coms like pets.com, priceline.com, etc. And so when I graduated in 2000, it was the height of the .com boom. And actually, a lot of people my age were becoming millionaires because all of these companies and these .com consultancies were also .coms themselves. And so people that joined got stock options, which then the stocks, hugely rose, split, etc. Lots of people were making lots of money at that time. That's why they call it the boom. But unfortunately, young fortune was not in the cards for me personally. So the .com bubble burst about a year later. And then I ended up moving on to a couple of major media companies where I got some great experience working in the digital departments. And again, in the early 2000s, this is the time that companies were just starting their very first digital departments within their businesses. And they suddenly recognized the power that being online had for them as a business. So at one of those companies, Alloy, I met a young and promising future lawyer who a few years later convinced me that I should go to law school. And this is really where I start to take interesting paths in my life. And a lot of people ask me, how on earth did I go from being in the technology world to being a lawyer? So this is the pivotal moment. And he probably doesn't even realize he did this, but he convinced me that basically legal logic was a lot like programming logic. And therefore, he thought I would be good at being a lawyer. And the other thing he mentioned was that at this point in time, people in the law didn't really understand these new technologies that were coming up. So back then it was peer-to-peer file sharing and Napster. And so they really needed people in the legal industry that understood technology and how it worked. And also they really needed people in the legal industry that were female. What's quite interesting is that's pretty much still ringing true to this day in 2020. So I took the LSAT, which was the entrance exam for law schools in the US, and I applied to schools in New York City where I was working, and I ended up at a university called Fordham University School of Law. And while I was there, I learned in my second year that there were some law firms who actually hired into their international offices. So I didn't have to stay in the States if I didn't want to. And I immediately got bitten by this international bug. I applied to a transfer program at University Panthéon-Assas, which is the top law school in Paris. And so in my 4 years of law school, because I spent the first 2 years doing it part-time while I was working, I managed to get an LLM from Paris, as well as my undergrad or my US law degree. And during that time, I also started applying to as many law firms as I could find that might look at hiring me into their international office, specifically into their London office. And I was very, very lucky in that I landed a position at Allen & Overy in London. So this is really now tributary number 2, which was me deciding that I wanted to move to London. And a lot of people ask me why. And to be completely honest, it was largely because I had been in New York for almost 9 years at that point in time. So I was really ready to move someplace new. I like big cities. I'm a city person, so I thought London would be a pretty easy transition from New York City. And actually, I happened to be listening to a lot of music that was coming out of the UK at the time, and I'm super into music. And so I thought that I would really love living in London. And those were the reasons for me to decide to live in London. Didn't have any contacts here. I didn't have any friends here. And the other 2 options in terms of working internationally as a US lawyer were pretty much Frankfurt and Hong Kong. And those 2 at the time didn't appeal to me at all. So I embarked on my second career, which was as a capital markets lawyer. And I won't go into the detail of what that is, but it's safe to say that relatively early on, it became evident that capital markets was not really where my passion was. And really, the whole idea of me becoming a lawyer was predicated on this idea of being in technology and having something different to offer in my technology experience. So really what I did was start to try to seek out as many opportunities as I could to bring the tech world into my legal practice. So that included working on a couple of the biggest tech IPOs of the day. That was Ocado and Betfair. And also, fortunately, the offices of Allen & Overy were right at the doorstep of Shoreditch, which was one of the first tech hubs in the UK. And so it was easy for me to stay connected to the local tech ecosystem by attending events and getting out and meeting people. So I did that to sort of keep satiated in terms of my interest in tech and staying up to date with what was going on here in London. But ultimately, I really needed to expand my experience. So I decided to make a move to a different law firm, Simmons & Simmons, which, actually happened to only be 5 minutes away. And I joined a very small corporate team there, where because it was smaller, I had the opportunity to do both US and English law aspects of the deals that I was working on, which really gave me a totally different perspective and broader experience overall. And I also got to do some non-capital markets work, hooray. So I got to start working on deals that were more in the general corporate law space. But ultimately, kind of what I really wanted to do was be working with technology companies. That was the world I came from, and that was kind of the world that I was trying to get back to. And so I decided to move on to Ashurst, which has and had at the time a very strong corporate client base. And so I really wanted to be someplace where I would have the most likelihood of getting access to the type of clients that I wanted to work with. And coincidentally, and a lot of the events in my story really have to do with coincidence and timing, fortuitous timing, to be completely honest. When I moved to Ashurst, it was right when what they referred to as the new economy, which became the digital economy, became a sector focus for the firm. And as that focus deepened, I was able to raise my hand and say, hey, I actually have a lot of real world experience working in that sector. And frankly, I talk some geek. I can help differentiate Ashurst as a real sector specialist, as someone who really understands how, what these businesses do and how they work and what's important for them. So actually, over the next couple of years, an old client of mine from Simmons happened to pop back up in London, and he was the head of the Techstars FinTech program in Shoreditch. So I was able to loop back in with him and start to bring some of these up-and-coming tech companies to Ashurst and introduce them. And they all needed some legal advice. And so I was able to sort of say, hey, I've got this stream of potential new clients who are doing really exciting things. And I'm meeting all these other people in the ecosystem who would love to have a firm of Ashurst caliber working with them. And so that was really exciting and something new that I was able to offer to the firm. But I was also able to continue doing the really big deals, working on major M&A transactions and capital markets transactions, specifically for tech-enabled businesses. And again, being able to bring the perspective of having worked in those industries before. And ultimately what that meant was I was able to carve out a bit of a niche practice for myself. And I think that sort of entrepreneurialism that I brought to my practice helped to bolster a decision to actually put me up for partnership. And I became a partner, which was a huge surprise. I never actually thought that was going to be the path that I was going to end up on. I kind of always saw myself moving a little bit more into the tech sphere. But Ashurst actually, since I had joined, had been developing its new law offering under the umbrella of Ashurst Advance. And there are a lot of law firms around the world who are also starting to focus on technology over these past about 6 years. And some of them were focused on fintechs, some of them were looking at more legal techs, some of them were saying different things about blockchain and AI and what they were doing, and that became a new area of practice for a lot of people. And there are a lot of different approaches in terms of law firms in particular about how they're looking at all of these new opportunities. And after a little bit of time, Ashurst recognized that there was an opportunity to start productizing some of its services, but doing so by adopting some of the best practices of customer-centric design that have been developing over the past 10 years in the tech industry. So it's really trying to learn all it could from the technology world and bring that into the legal world and understand how we could start using technology to deliver our services to our clients. And that's really how Ashurst Digital Ventures was born. So ADV, as we call it internally, is the technology arm of Ashurst Advance, our new law division. And we're dedicated to delivering technology-driven solutions that are designed to meet our clients' ever-evolving needs. That's our party line. So amazingly, suddenly, after a 10-year career, suddenly, the technologist turned lawyer was suddenly immersed in the LawTech world. So that's how I got here. But what does that have to do with anything, and why do you care? So at my very first job at Science that I mentioned, the chief marketing officer during the training program said this phrase to me, to us actually, my cohort, and it stuck with me forever. And it's that there's no such thing as work life and home life. There's just your life. And I've always, held on to that since that day 20 years ago, almost literally 20 years ago. And I think that's really, really important because it brings me back to that second slide that I said I'd come back to, where I sort of listed out all of the attributes that I think about when I think of myself. Because I think what has made me successful first in tech and then in law, and what I hope is going to make me successful in my new career in law tech, it's not that I have any one skill or type of experience. It's actually the culmination of all of the experiences that I've had, and really everything that it is that makes me me. And I think that's really important. We've reached this point in the world where I think bringing your whole self to the office or to your work or to your job or to whatever it is actually that you're doing is really important, and it's been recognized as being really valuable, and having that diversity of thought and experience that you can bring. So for example, to the art of problem solving, which is ultimately the goal of what I'm trying to do in LawTech. I'm trying to work with my clients and understand them, know what questions to ask them, understand them on different levels. And also, I think being willing to actually have a lot of ambition and dream big about what we are trying to achieve. And to be able to continue to actually year on year increase my aspiration and in the reach of, in the scope of what I think we can do. Because ultimately, what we're trying to do within Ashurst and within ADV is be a part of the transformation of the legal sector. And I think it's really important that you have different experiences that you can bring to the table when you're trying to do something of that type of scale. So, my sort of message for everyone here is whether you're in tech, whether you're in law, whether you're from outside of law and tech, but you think law tech sounds like an interesting place to be and you'd like to understand where the opportunities are. I think it's really important, to recognize that there's actually no single path to get to where you want to go to next. And while that means that there's no template for you to follow, it also means that there's no mold that you need to specifically fit in. And I just think that's so important because the legal services industry is an industry that's so entrenched in precedent and how things were done in the past. And I really see that changing. Law tech is completely new for all of us. And that's really exciting because we're all learning this together. We're all in this together. And so I think if you're open to learning and you're open to trying and you're willing to fail and you're willing to accept failure sometimes, but recognize that there's learning in that, then I think law tech is actually a fantastic place for you to be in. This is the place for you. So that's my inspirational bit of this 20 minutes. I thought it might be worthwhile to just give you guys a little bit of the flavor of what I actually do on a day-to-day basis. And so there's quite a lot, and this probably isn't everything. But in my role, I'm still responsible for delivering to our clients. It's just that I'm always looking at ways to leverage technology to deliver. So that means in any given day, I'm doing all of the client-facing activities that someone in a law firm might do. I'm also leading teams of people and responsible for all the things that come with that and being responsible for managing teams. I have to manage my team's workload and be on top of what everyone's doing and making sure everyone's working as efficiently as possible. Sometimes I actually have to do the work myself, so that's rolling up my sleeves and do the doing. I have to make sure we're getting paid for all the work that we're doing. And ultimately, on a day-to-day basis, I'm just interacting with other people all the time, inside and outside of the business. And I think potentially it's quite a difference from someone that might be coming from, in particular, a more mature technology business, where the scope of people's roles might be more specific to their function. People that work in law firms and in law tech, I think just by the nature of what we do, have to be super cross-functional and multidimensional in terms of what they do on a day-to-day basis. And I think it's potentially a little bit more akin to a proper startup where it's really all about the hustle and the drive that you have. And so the people on your team need to sort of be in it together. And that's, I think, what's one of the really exciting and rewarding aspects of what I do is that I love what I'm doing, and the people that I'm working with are really invested in what we're doing. We all stand behind the vision of transformation within this industry and learning as much as possible from other industries to bring them in to make this work better. And thinking that there is a greater purpose to what we're doing. It's not just it's not just a 9-to-5, it's not just a day job, and it's not just a paycheck. We are actually really invested in the success of what we're trying to achieve. I also really love the variety of my day. So I'm never stuck in a room behind a desk all day long, except for right now, but I'm stuck in a slightly larger apartment, so it's not too bad. I'm always out there meeting people and learning new things. And I think that's just one of the best things about where I've ended up so far on my journey. And it's certainly never in a million years where I thought I would end up, but it has amazingly become the absolute perfect place for me to be. So really happy to have shared some of that with you. And I would love to take any questions. That's a great question. And I think ultimately with LawTech, it's all about user-centric design, and it's all about taking that idea of what does the client really want, what are the client's problems, and then what can we offer them in terms of helping to solve them, and should we be the ones to solve them? Because there are some client problems that maybe a law firm isn't necessarily best place to do. So I think firstly, it comes from being brave enough to ask your client questions. And for those of you who aren't familiar with how it works in a law firm, and I can say this as an American, English people are overly polite about everything. So frankly, even when I do a transaction and I want to invoice my client, I send them an email or I give them a call and I ask them if I can please send them my invoice for the deal. And then it usually ends up taking 3 times as long to go through that process, because I'm not willing to just say, oh, here's my bill, I expect payment on this date. That's just not the English way. So I think it's being brave enough, even though you'll know that client really well probably, of actually trying to ask them the questions that are going to get to those underlying problems. Because usually when a client comes to you, they're saying, hey, I've got a matter I want you to work on, and it's very clear, you think anyway, what they want to do, and you start reacting very quickly to that request. And what lawyers have not traditionally been very good at is saying, oh, that's really great, thank you for asking me to help you with that. Let's stop for a moment and actually think about whether what you've just asked me to do is actually the right thing to do, or maybe there's something else we should do first, or maybe there's a different way I could do the thing you just asked me to do. And so I think a huge part of it is actually being brave, and rather than running off really quickly when a client comes to you with a question or a problem or a request, actually taking the time to stop and talk to them a little bit more about what it is that they're looking to achieve, and then figuring out what's the best way for you to help them achieve that. And that's definitely not something that comes naturally, I think, to people who have been practicing law for a long period of time. And then, of course, you have to, if you're looking to develop specific technology solutions as opposed to just looking at new ways of doing things for a client, then it's also, being willing to actually step up and say, hey, can I have some of your time? Can I ask you some questions about how you do X, Y, and Z, or how you're supporting your business in these ways, and the things that we can do for you to help you with that. And that's, I think, over the past couple of years been something I've been hearing consistently from our client base is, we want you to come, they want, how should I say this? They want us to come to them and say, listen, like, how can we help you? How can we get to know your business even better, in order for us to come up with some new ideas about products or services we could offer you that you wouldn't have even thought to ask us to provide to you. From an ADV perspective, I think, on the basis of the engagement we've had internally and externally to date, we're looking at a few things. There's firstly, I think, digitizing this sort of client-lawyer engagement experience. So some of that is, being able to put some tools in clients' hands where they can self-serve. They can get access to some of our legal knowledge and insights without having to actually email us or pick up the phone to us and ask us the question. And the consequent worrying that, we've ticked on a timer and are going to start billing them for that. So there's that aspect of how do we sort of digitize that experience. And then on the flip side, internally, it's how can we use technology to deliver things for clients, in effect behind the scenes. And that's, what everyone is doing, contract automation or document automation, things like that, things we can be doing in the background to help make us work more efficiently for our clients, that they don't really actually even see that happening. With it, what they get is just the final product, the advice or piece of work that they're looking for. And then I think the really interesting bit is then when you start to look at the sort of further innovation horizons in terms of, and as I said, what are those problems that our clients aren't even realizing they should come to us and ask us for help with, and helping and trying to surface what those problems are, and then thinking of ways that we can actually meet those problems. And so that's sort of the interesting area of opportunity that we see. That's, of course, much more challenging. But for example, if you're servicing clients in regulated sectors, some of that is quite easy to identify relatively quickly. For example, oh, there's a new law coming into effect and it's going to impact my clients in this way, and they're going to need to do X, Y, and Z things in order to become compliant and be ready for that regulation, and looking at how you can do things for them in that way. But there's probably some newer things, things we don't even know about, that we could look to do. And so that's kind of future looking. How do we actually surface those unknown problems, the unknown unknowns as opposed to the known unknowns, and come up with really elegant and innovative ways of addressing them. Ashurst Digital Ventures, as I mentioned, is a part of Ashurst Events, which is our new law division. So within Ashurst, we have 4 legal divisions: the traditional legal services divisions, and then Ashurst Events. So we're a part of the firm. In terms of kind of business model, when we deliver services using technology, we either do that, by basically putting technology in the hands of the clients, in which case that's more likely than not a subscription style model. There may be specific client matters that we support using technology, in which case that the model for those are, the traditional legal models, but of course, we do pricing a little bit differently. We also have teams of legal technologists that do support, so they effectively act as fee earners on transactions and deals, and then we can also charge directly for the use of technology. I think the sort of aim would be to have as flexible as an offering as possible. And so, depending on what it is we're offering the client, we would choose the model that we think makes the most sense for them and for us. But we certainly, in terms of some of the more specific technology in clients' hands models, would more likely than not be looking to use kind of a SaaS subscription model. Well, I'll say one thing that hopefully gives you a little bit of, hope isn't the right word, but one of the things that I've actually found now, having sort of done the traditional legal services bit now, and now doing the new law bit, is one of the things I've noticed is actually, one, how tremendously resilient lawyers are, and two, how tremendously adaptable lawyers are. And I think those are 2 really important characteristics for a person to have when you're working in, these sort of innovation new law roles, because a lot of these roles are relatively undefined. It's difficult to know exactly what to expect from some of us and what we're supposed to be doing. We're sort of defining our roles as we go. And I think that can be quite disconcerting for some people. But I think coming from your background, ultimately, I think you just need that sort of can-do attitude and that willingness to roll up your sleeves and just get in the weeds and do whatever it is that needs to be done, and to support your team members and slot in wherever it is that you need to go. And I think, being a great team member, having that sort of resilience and flexibility is really, really important. And I think, I don't subscribe to this idea that like lawyers are special, but there are unique aspects of the legal services industry that are undeniable. And I think having that frame of reference can be really important. So I think also, having that frame of reference and understanding how law firms work, but being willing to challenge that at all times is really important as well. So I think I'll give a few micro and a few macro. So I think on the micro level, I see AI as being the technology that has the power to really shift the dial in terms of how sort of traditional legal services are done, and moving us into a much more automated world. We haven't yet seen, in my opinion, a lot of really sophisticated AI that works the way lawyers expect them to work. So I think that's a challenge, but I do think that in the next few years, we're going to probably start to see some really sophisticated uses of AI that do change the way lawyers interact with each other and with their clients, and with the sort of wealth of data and knowledge that we have, mostly sitting in silos and sitting in hard copy form somewhere within our businesses. The other, from a slightly more micro perspective, I think are actually slightly more functional things. So workflow, that type of stuff where it's not, necessarily as sexy as something like when you say AI, although AI isn't, and how we're using it right now is not tremendously sexy. But I think that those little components, those are the little bits, workflow and things like that, are the things that hang what we do together. And I think the challenges that we have with technology right now is we have pieces of technology that are principally single point solutions, and they do one thing, hopefully really well. But what we need to start seeing is those flows of information. And so I think whether it's a workflow platform or whether it's integrations, I think the ability to start to string together those small bits of functionality into something slightly more cohesive and into something that could be a product is going to become really, really important. And then I think at a slightly more macro level, maybe extrapolating on that from a macro level, I see the legal world heading into a plug and play universe where, again, I think what a law firm or a legal services provider can offer a client, I think clients are going to start to be a bit more discerning, and they're going to want the best of each bit, and so they're going to want to be able to frankly look at their service providers as a stack that they can start plugging and playing into, and lifting out and plugging in the new better provider when that one comes along. So I think that being able to understand that stack metaphor and sort of learn a little bit from what we've seen in, for example, in open banking, and applying that into the legal sector, I think that's going to be something probably in the next 5 to 10 years we're going to start seeing that become a bit more tangible for us as service providers. I would suspect that a lot of discretionary spend is being put on hold by everyone right now, because cash flow is just impossible to predict right now, and we're about to enter into for those of us on the sort of UK accounting period that starts in April, a lot of us are about to enter into a new financial period, and I would suspect a lot of us will want to be as conservative as possible in doing that. That being said, what I've been saying to everyone is this actually presents a huge opportunity for those of us that are looking at using technology, because I think this situation has really brought to light the fact that many of our businesses are not really prepared and are not really digital. They're not prepared for a digital world. And what that means is that there's clearly opportunity here. So I think that what would be important in terms of actually trying to attract, businesses spend if you're in legal tech is, finding, is having that functionality that, means you can be everywhere from any place, and you're delivering actually a business critical service, something that people who end up being widely dispersed and online only will need to have access to, and was something that they were a little bit complacent when they got to go into the office to do, didn't think about how to push the envelope in terms of being able to do those things. But I do ultimately think that, as I said, I think this is an opportunity. So I definitely think that if you've got the right technology toolkit, you can definitely take advantage of what's going on. And I think I'm actually really hopeful. I do think that this is helping in particular, not necessarily pure adoption of legal tech, but I think it's helping to change people's mindsets. I've got super gray haired partners that I work with who are just like, I'm loving this. Like, I'm loving being digital. I'm loving, working from home and having my headset and things like that. So actually, I think it is doing a lot to help shift the dial in terms of people who were very ingrained in the way they work to actually be forced out of their box and to recognize actually it's relatively easy to work remotely. It's relatively easy to work with digital tools as long as they've got the right digital tools. If that's a general early stage companies, it's always help with financing. So, for those of you that are familiar with that space, startups are in a constant cycle of fundraising. So they're always looking for intros to people who might be able to provide them with funds, but also assistance from a legal services perspective with all the documentation around that. I think if it's more specific to the legal tech space, then I think most commonly, earlier stage legal tech companies want to understand how we work and want to understand, what are the real use cases for their technology. So, we meet a lot of people who have great technology, have great backgrounds, doing technology in other sectors potentially, or are, super smart data scientists or something like that. But they don't exactly understand or appreciate how, legal services businesses work. And so they really, or how lawyers work, and some of the challenges of that. So what I think a lot of them really want are people who are able to give them some of their time to help them understand how they can make their products and services better and more fit for purpose. Absolutely. I mean, I think collaboration in the law tech space is going to be absolutely vital. And that doesn't need to just be collaboration between the tech companies and the law firms. So of course, that has been happening. But really that next phase, I think, is, and we're starting to see it, but it's certainly not widespread, is collaboration amongst the law firms themselves. And I absolutely think that, in particular, smaller and larger firms who probably are not really seen as traditional competitors would be ideal collaborators, because a smaller firm maybe have slightly more niche and deep expertise in specific areas that either the law firm doesn't have at scale, or the law firm doesn't have at all. Or maybe the smaller firm, for whatever reason, just has someone in their firm that does great things with technology that a larger firm would love to have access to, or vice versa. So I think hopefully, these like, law tech meetups and bridge programs is a way to bring all of us together. But I would certainly be open to any, small firm that reached out to Ashurst and was looking for interesting ways to collaborate. That's a good and tough question. I guess it's probably how absolutely stubborn most lawyers are about moving away from things like Microsoft Word. Like, we are just absolutely wedded to Microsoft Word, and you can build the absolute best cloud-based word processing program. But if you can't import and export out of Word, lawyers are just going to be like, I don't like that, just doesn't really work for me. And I've had a lot of people say, but our thing is so much better. And it's like, I know, but you're still just not going to get anyone to use it, because we are literally wedded to Word right now. And most of us aren't even on like 365. I mean, we are behind the times from a technology perspective. So I think it's that challenge of mindset, and I do think it's just a mindset thing. That challenge of mindset, I think how high that hurdle is probably the biggest surprise. I feel like this question was planted, but it wasn't. In fact, yes, Barclays, in fact, has recently wrapped up a pilot program with an innovation consortium of some of its panel law firms, which myself and Sarah Chambers, who's I think on the call, participated in on behalf of Ashurst. And there was 8 law firms who we got divided up into teams of 2 or 3 law firms. Or sorry, it turned into 9 law firms, which is why there was one team of 3. And we basically were given a handful of problem statements from the Barclays team, and we had the opportunity to sort of interrogate and tease out what we thought would be a potentially actionable problem statement, and then design a potential solution. And so that was the bulk of that work was done over a 12-week period. That was us meeting at least weekly with our sort of team members. Ashurst worked with Pinsent Masons, and we had a great collaboration with them. Got to know them really well and different people across their team. got to really understand how they approach these types of problems, which was different to kind of our approach, and learn on both sides of the table from that perspective. And then, present what we thought was a kick-ass idea that we would love to continue to work on, and are hoping to be able to work on further, and present that back to the other panel firms, as well as people within Barclays, and to get their thoughts. And I think, Barclays ultimately they had one team that actually produced something that they were able to start using straight away. A few more developed ideas, and one where actually they wanted to investigate the problem a little bit more, but they had thoughts around what the potential solutions could look like, but they just needed to do a bit more engagement and sort of understanding really what the users wanted. So I thought that Barclays got a lot out of that. Personally, that was my view, our view, that they got quite a lot out of that. And I think it really did show that law firms can work together, sort of traditional competitors can work together, and the power of doing that. And I would love to see, more of that happening, as I've said, whether it's sort of bigger law firms or bigger and smaller law firms. I think collaboration is ultimately going to be essential to the success of LawTech as a concept. So I think probably the thing that helps me the most is, in particular, that I spent almost 5 years within the firm before I moved into an innovation role. And so everyone within the firm knows me and knew me really, really well. They knew me as a lawyer. And what that meant is that, from my perspective, there are only open doors in terms of me coming and talking to them about ideas that our team has, and about things that we think we can do and we can change. And there's also a certain element of, as I said before, what helped me a bit as a lawyer, talking to tech companies, was I talked a bit of geek. And so, I talk a lot of law. And so being able to, communicate with people within law firms, in particular those that are resistant to change, and knowing really how far you can push them, and not, challenging, their existence and their 30-year careers as a lawyers as being, outdated and antiquated, but actually knowing how to, I think, explain what we want to do and the changes we want to make in a way that incentivizes them and makes them realize how good it is for them, which, frankly, it's sad but true, is the way a lot of partners think. They're business owners, and so they want to know, is this going to be good for my business? And so you do need to be careful about the way you talk about things, especially when you're asking them to make changes, or to invest their time without a guarantee of a return. So I think that's really important. So I'm personally not a fan of the one platform to rule them all concept. I don't think that's the winning strategy. I think the winning strategy is, as I said before, is to be able to be part of the overall LawTech stack. So I think that's really where that collaboration can come into fruition, where if we all just recognize what someone might be better at than others, and kind of find our own areas of strength, and then make sure that we're completely interoperable with everyone else, then I think it gives the client the choice, which is really important for them. Again, I think the sort of using the open banking metaphor, it's really about giving the client the choice and the power over their data and their ability to move between providers to have the best service. And so I think that one platform to rule them all doesn't do that for them. I think they need the ability to go to individual providers and get the best out of them. But as long as we're all interoperable with one another and can all fit within the same stack, then that's where I think we're filling that client need of that central client need, making sure we're giving them the best experience overall. So I agree, there's a lot of hype about blockchain, and it's definitely not there yet. I think, can LawTech do more than digitize? I think so. And I think, again, I don't mean to repeat myself, but I think there is that bit. And I think this first bit is about digitizing practice. And I think that's something that is a gateway towards doing, getting to the more interesting innovations. But I think if you think about the horizons of innovation, I think there is an area of unknown unknowns where there are things that clients need where we can be supporting the business as opposed to being seen as just providing legal services. And I think when we sort of step up from just digitizing what we do, digitizing information, providing it in a digital format, but are able to then tailor and customize on top of that, in a way that, for example, our tools can be put in the hands of the business people as opposed to just the lawyers within the business, then I think we start to see really interesting things happen. And then I think as sort of legal services moves and becomes more of a business services platform, then I think we have the opportunity to find these adjacencies in terms of what we have traditionally done in from a legal services perspective, and can find new ways that actually we can be supporting our clients that aren't specifically just, here's legal information in a digital form. So I don't know exactly what those services and solutions will be because they are unknowns. But I certainly have had lots of conversations with clients where, they're already asking for that. They want for us to develop things for them that they can put in the hands of their business people. So I don't think that's necessarily far off in terms of the client's understanding that will be helpful for them. But I think that, to get there, we do need to get through just the digitizing process as well. So, this is all kind of a process, and we need to work our way up to those things and not buy into the hype of some of the new technologies that are coming around. But I do think we need to have our eye on that bigger, more interesting prize of, real disruption, of real value creation, of looking beyond just legal services as we know it today and what it is we could be providing in the future. Oh, I could talk about this for 20 minutes or longer. And do I think the only way for law firms to do this stuff effectively is by having a degree of separation from the traditional partnership model? So I think that's a great question, actually. And it's something that in the context of ADV, we have actually gone around in terms of our thinking on that. So I'll say firstly, and this is a completely personal and non-endorsed view of anyone else, which is that I think the law firm partnership model is like an absolutely ridiculous model, but I have to accept that it exists, and I'm actually part of it. But as I said before, what that means is that individual partners are not, this is a very blanket statement, they are largely incentivized by how much money we can put in their pocket, because the profits of the firm go into their pocket at the end of every year. And so what that means is that you need, as I said, you need to be able to talk to those people in a way that helps them understand how this is benefiting all of us, and it's benefiting them specifically. So that's really important in terms of the messaging, and that's a huge challenge. They see investment in projects as money out of their pocket. They actually see it that way. And so you really have to, have your airtight business case and business plan about what you're intending to do and how ultimately it puts more money in their pocket at the end of the day. So I think that's a huge challenge, but that's the way you get through it. Do I think that there needs to be a degree of segregation? I do, but I don't think that means it has to be a different business or has to be in a separate company or entity. What I think the partnership needs to be able to offer, an initiative like ADV, for example, is enough freedom and control over decision making, to trust them to make good decisions and to have processes in place to make decisions, and to give them that level of not complete autonomy, but a level of ability to make those decisions on their own within the context of their overall business plan. But I don't think being segregated is necessarily the right thing, especially for someone doing something like this within a law firm context, because at the end of the day, clients come to us because we are a law firm. So if we can offer them the technology, that's great, but ultimately they come to us for the law first, for the legal advice first. And so I think if you separate them too much, then I think you lose a little bit about what may potentially be a USP for someone trying to do this within the context of a law firm.
So yeah, just want to say a huge thanks again to Tara for taking the time. Yeah, And thanks everyone for coming along.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye for now.
Have a good rest of the day.